There's a story buried beneath the soil of a forgotten county. A story the ground itself seems to resist remembering. They say that when the old farmhouse was torn down in 1979, the workers found something beneath the floorboards. A cradle built into the earth, still lined with rotted cloth and animal bones. Inside were traces of human remains so small, so malformed, that the coroner refused to sign the report. He said it didn't look like any child he'd ever seen. The bones were twisted inward, fused, almost serpentine, as if the body had been trying to fold itself back into the womb that birthed it. Neighbors whispered that the woman who lived there had been pregnant 6 times, though no one had ever seen a baby. Only the screams. Those came regularly, echoing across the valley on nights when the air felt too still, when even the crickets went silent. Some said she screamed for the children she lost. Others said she screamed because they came back. There was a man too, pale, soft-spoken, always walking 2 steps behind her. Some thought he was her husband. Some thought he was her son. Both were right. Which city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? The land keeps its dead quiet here, tucked deep within the old folds of Appalachia, where the ridgelines are steep and the rivers cut through the clay like open veins. There once stood a settlement that maps no longer mark. It was never a proper town, just a cluster of homes stitched together by dirt roads and bloodlines. They called it Morrow Hollow. The name doesn't appear in any census past 1912. It was erased, not forgotten, but deliberately removed. The earliest records we have come from a surveyor's journal, dated 1874, describing the place as a valley of stillness, where the same faces repeat across generations. The surveyor wrote about families with names he could not tell apart. He noted that the children had eyes, too pale, like milk diluted with water. He never went back. Isolation was not a curse there. It was law. The mountain walls kept the people in and the world out. No trains reached that far. No post office, no church bells, no schools. When the rest of America was burning its candles into electricity, Morrow Hollow still lived by oil lamps and superstition. Every birth was recorded in the same trembling handwriting by the same midwife for almost 50 years. The soil was too poor for farming, so they turned inward, into themselves. Marriages were arranged between cousins to keep what little land they had in the family. Over time, bloodlines coiled tighter and tighter, like snakes devouring their own tails. Outsiders sometimes wandered in, a traveler, a trader, but none stayed long. Those who did began to change. They said the air there was heavy, the kind that makes a body feel watched. There are fragments of letters in county archives, written by a schoolteacher who was sent there in 1908. She lasted only 1 season. In her final letter, she wrote, "They stare at me with a sameness I cannot describe. Their speech runs together, their faces rhyme. The older ones move slow, as though their bones remember something the rest of us have forgotten." By 1920, Morrow Hollow was a rumor. By 1930, but in 1978, when a doctor from the county health department hiked through the valley on a forgotten medical outreach route, he found signs that people had never truly left. Smoke still rose from the chimneys. Laundry hung from lines. Footprints in the mud, small, barefoot, childlike. And in the house at the end of the hollow, he found her. The doctor said she looked younger than her years, but older somehow too, like the body and the spirit had stopped aging at different times. She sat on the porch when he arrived, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching him with a silence that felt rehearsed. Behind her, the house was a ruin of sagging beams and animal skins nailed to the walls. A man sat in the shadows near the doorway, eyes low, motionless, as though waiting for something to end. Her name was Horatia. At least, that's how the doctor wrote it in his notes. She told him she was 23. But her birth record, the one he later uncovered in a courthouse basement, said otherwise. Born in 1956, which would have made her 22. A small inconsistency, but in this family, time itself seemed uncertain. The house smelled of iron and milk. On a wooden table lay 3 dolls carved from bone, their faces featureless, their hands fused together. When the doctor asked about them, she said, "They were my babies." Before, no one corrected her. The man in the shadows stepped forward only once, to light her cigarette. The way he did it, the way she looked at him, something passed between them. Not love, not even comfort, something older, ritualistic, a repetition of what had already been done before either of them was born. In the village nearby, no one claimed to know her, but when pressed, the older residents muttered the same word: kin. Everyone was kin. Her mother had died giving birth to her youngest sibling, though no one was sure if it was her sibling or her child. The record lists the father as unknown. Her father's name appears on 3 different marriage certificates to women with the same surname. One of those women was his niece. The handwriting on the forms never changes. As a girl, Horatia was said to wander through the woods speaking to herself, or to someone no one else could see. When she was 12, she stopped going into town. When she was 16, she stopped leaving the property entirely. And by 20, she had stopped speaking much at all. The doctor noted that she carried herself as though afraid of the world, but obedient to something within it. He found her pregnant, far along. Her abdomen rose against the fabric of a dress that hung from her like a borrowed garment. When he asked who the father was, she pointed to the man in the doorway. He smiled faintly. Then she said, almost apologetically, "My husband." The doctor wrote one more note before leaving that day, a single line that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A husband calls her mama. Night fell heavy in that valley. The doctor stayed longer than he intended, kept by the rain and the feeling that leaving too soon would be an act of cowardice. He slept in his truck outside the house, but he could hear them, the woman and the man, through the walls and the storm. Not arguing, not whispering, chanting. Words too soft to understand but too rhythmic to be random. In the morning, he walked back up the porch steps and found a trail of feathers leading to the barn. Chickens, their necks broken cleanly, hung from the rafters. Beneath them, small handprints pressed into the dirt, as though a child had been kneeling there, praying. The doctor called out, and Horatia appeared in the doorway, barefoot, her dress soaked through. She smiled with a kind of sadness that looked practiced. "They need the blood to stay," she said. He asked who they were. She only pointed at the ground. That's when he saw it, etched into the packed earth beneath the hanging birds. A spiral, burned black by what looked like candle wax and soot. In its center lay a stillborn animal. Not a pig, not a rabbit. Its limbs too human, its head too large. The doctor stumbled backward, the stench rising around him like steam from the underworld. He tried to report it, but the county line was a maze of jurisdiction. The sheriff said he'd send a deputy. None came. By the time he returned, days later, the barn had been emptied. The animals were gone, the spiral erased. The air smelled of bleach and rain. Locals said the family had always done things when births went wrong. Things passed down from grandmothers who kept jars of bone ash and herbs in the root cellars. There were stories of candles lit in mirrors, of cradles buried under houses. of mothers who refused to name their dead until the 7th night after burial, to see if they stayed gone, one old man said. But what unsettled the doctor most wasn't what he saw. It was what he heard. The man, the supposed husband, had started calling her by another name in front of others, Mama. Sometimes Ma. She didn't correct him. And when he asked again who the father of the child was, the family laughed. Not cruelly, but the way people laugh when a question makes no sense. He began tracing their lineage, trying to build a tree from the scraps of courthouse records and half-remembered testimonies. Every path led back to itself, names looping, repeating, bleeding into one another. Great-grandfathers who were also uncles, daughters who became wives, sons who became fathers twice over in the same generation. By the 5th page of his notes, the doctor realized the truth wasn't linear, it was circular. And at its center stood erasure, the final collapse of a bloodline devouring itself. The night before she gave birth, neighbors said the house lit up from within, every window glowing red like a furnace. No one went near. The screams came again, but this time there were two, one deep, one higher, both fading into the same sound. When the doctor returned, the lights were out. The door stood open, and somewhere inside, a baby was crying, a sound sharp and wrong, like breath escaping a throat not built to hold it. He found her in the corner of the bedroom, knees drawn to her chest, the afterbirth still staining the boards beneath her. The child lay wrapped in a shawl beside the bed, silent now, though the air still trembled with the echo of its first cry. The man was gone. Only his boots remained by the door, mud caked up to the ankles, as if he'd walked straight into the rain and vanished. Erasia's eyes were open but empty. The doctor spoke to her softly, asking questions she didn't hear. Her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird beneath his fingers. When he tried to lift the child, she gripped his wrist with unexpected strength. "Don't take him," she said. "He'll come back wrong if you take him." But there was no breath, no warmth. The thing she called her son had never lived. The doctor swaddled the body anyway, as gently as he could. He wanted to take it to the county hospital for examination, but when he stepped outside, a small crowd had gathered. Men, women, children, all standing in the rain, silent. Their faces looked carved from the same pale wood. Every eye fixed on the bundle in his arms. He said later that in that moment, he understood. The resemblance wasn't coincidence. It was inheritance. Their faces were variations of the same pattern, copied and recopied until individuality wore thin. He asked one of them, a woman about Erasia's age, where the man had gone. She said, "He's her boy. He can't go far." That was when the doctor called for help, for verification, for someone to confirm what he already feared. The blood samples were sent away, the genealogies compiled, the lines traced and retraced until the conclusion could no longer be denied. Her husband was her son, not adopted, not mistaken, her biological son, born from a pregnancy she'd carried when she was barely 14. Her own father had been her uncle. His father, in turn, had been both cousin and brother to the same woman. The pattern spiraled backward through generations, until there was no distinction left between mother and wife, between father and son. The geneticists would later call it a closed-loop lineage, a bloodline so folded in on itself that it produced something beyond human comprehension. Her DNA carried echoes of ancestors, only 2 generations apart, repeating endlessly, like a name whispered into an empty cave. They estimated her coefficient of inbreeding at over 40%, higher than any recorded human case. Her genome looked more like an experiment than a lineage, a biological Ouroboros devouring its own tail. And yet she lived. She breathed. She carried life, even if only for moments. The doctors studying her case didn't know whether to call her a survivor or a symptom. The report never made it to public record. The county sealed it under medical confidentiality. The man was never seen again, though footprints leading into the woods were found weeks later. Small, bare, stopping abruptly at the edge of a creek. In his private notes, the doctor wrote one last line before closing the file. The child was stillborn. The mother survived. The cycle did not. But he was wrong. Cycles like that don't die. They wait. The house stood for another year. Then, one night, it burned. No one saw who lit the fire, though the sheriff said later it didn't matter. That place was cursed to ash the moment she was born. He told the press, though no statement was ever printed. The story never made the papers. What did appear briefly was a 2-line obituary erasure. M. Holloway, 32 years old. Died of complications following childbirth. No mention of the child, no mention of the man. By dawn, all that remained of the farmhouse were blackened beams and the smell of something sweet and rotted. The soil itself seemed blistered, as if the fire had burned deeper than wood. The coroner's office retrieved 2 sets of remains, one adult female and one indeterminate juvenile. The latter was listed as unclassifiable. When the doctor came back to identify the bodies, he said the scene didn't feel like an ending. It felt like erasure. Every photograph, every document, every record of that family began to vanish. The county archive flooded mysteriously that same season, dissolving baptism logs, birth certificates, and census lists from the 1890s to the 1940s, as if the town itself was being rewritten. Neighbors moved away, some overnight. The ones who stayed refused to speak her name. They said it made the air turn cold. Children born in the valley after that year were kept from playing near the property. Cattle that grazed too close were found dead, bellies swollen, eyes clouded white. The doctor, now old and unwell, left the county, but before he went, he visited the burial site one last time. The graves were shallow, the markers unmarked, only small wooden crosses, identical, as if identity no longer mattered. He placed a single note beneath a stone before he left. It read, "This was never sin. It was entropy." The locals say the field still glows faintly after rain, like phosphorus rising from the soil. Some nights, if you walk the old fence line, you can hear something underfoot. Not voices, but a rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat trapped beneath the dirt. They say that's where the bloodline sleeps. Or maybe it's where it's learning to wake again. Decades passed. The Holloway name was spoken only in whispers, usually by old men drunk enough to forget why it frightened them. The farmhouse was gone, the field reclaimed by weeds and dust. For most, the story had dissolved, a rumor buried in folklore, until 1979. A storm had torn through the county that spring, flooding the river and toppling half the trees that lined the old road. When the soil collapsed near the creek, it exposed something hard and white beneath the roots. A fragment of bone. Human. Small. The sheriff, new to the county, ordered an excavation. What they uncovered wasn't a body, but many, layered, folded into one another like pages in a book. Infants, mostly, but some were ambiguous. Limbs fused, spines doubled. Skulls that had never learned which way to grow. At the bottom of the pit lay a rusted tin box. Inside it were the only surviving records of the Holloway case, carbon copies of the coroner's notes, fragments of birth certificates, and 2 undeveloped photographs sealed in wax. The film was sent to the state lab in Montgomery. When the negatives returned, Only one image was clear. It showed a woman, Eratia, seated in front of a mirror. Behind her stood a man, his hands resting on her shoulders. The photograph was taken at an angle, catching both their reflections. But in the glass, something was wrong. The reflection of the man was missing entirely. Only her face appeared, doubled, overlapping slightly, as if two versions of her existed in the same frame. The second photograph was never shown publicly. The archivist who developed it resigned 2 weeks later. His final entry in the logbook read, "It wasn't a child. It wasn't anything I've seen born of this world." After that, the state sealed the findings again, this time under archival suppression, Order Fe 1147. The official statement said the remains were animal in nature. But one of the deputies who helped with the dig, a man named Crowley, told a reporter, off record, that when he lifted the final skull from the mud, he heard something inside it. Like air escaping, like a sigh. The archives were locked, the field fenced off. Yet, even then, strange things began to happen in the county offices. The microfilm machine jammed whenever someone tried to view the Holloway records. The photographs darkened with time, her face dissolving first, leaving only her outline. A void shaped like a woman. They said it was just decay. But one technician swore he saw the reflection from the photograph move, blink, even after the power went out. By the time anyone dared speak her name again, the year was 2016. A freelance journalist named Naomi Fletcher had been hired to digitize old county records for a historical grant. She wasn't local, didn't know the legends, didn't believe in hauntings. To her, the Holloway file was just another collapsed archive, brittle paper and mold, eaten tape. But the file wouldn't stay where she put it. Every morning, it was back on her desk. She thought it was a prank from the clerks, until she noticed something impossible. The handwriting on the top sheet kept changing. Some days it looked typed. Other days, the letters bled and curled, as if written in ink still wet. One night, out of curiosity, she stayed late, past the flickering hum of the hallway lights. The office empty but for her and the faint crackle of an old radio. She scanned the first page of the Holloway coroner's report. The image froze halfway through, the screen flickering. Then, just for a second, a face appeared on the monitor, reflected faintly in the static. Not hers. A woman, pale, hair wet, eyes dark as soaked earth. Naomi unplugged the scanner, certain she was imagining it, but the file on her desktop had saved itself under a new name, Restied Mnt Stil. When she reopened it, the photograph was clearer. Eratia, same pose, same mirror, only now the reflection was visible behind her. A man, barefoot, hands resting on her shoulders, his mouth open in mid-word. Naomi brought the file to her editor, but when they tried to print it, the printer screamed. A shrill mechanical sound that made the fluorescent lights flicker out. When they came back, the paper tray was empty, the image gone. That night, Naomi went home and tried again on her laptop. The file opened, but instead of an image, a single line of text appeared on her screen. "You've made us remember." The next day, her coworkers found her apartment door open. No sign of struggle, no forced entry, only her recorder on the table, still running. The final 3 seconds captured the sound of breathing, shallow, synchronized, like 2 lungs sharing one rhythm. Her notes, however, survived. Scribbled in the margins of a notebook found near her desk, she'd written, "It's not folklore. The bloodline never ended. New birth certificates match the pattern. Same surnames repeating. Same facial anomalies. There's a child in the next county. Same eyes. Same bones." The county sealed the investigation once more. But some of the files leaked online, in fragments, scans too degraded to verify, names blacked out except one Holloway. Locals say if you drive down County Road 9 at night, the wind sounds like someone whispering, "Mama." Others swear the reflection of the burned farmhouse sometimes appears in car windows, glowing faintly in the dark. But what no one says, what no one wants to admit, is that every few decades, another woman is born there. Same jawline, same gaze. And when she speaks, it sounds like two voices layered into one. There's a house again. Not the same one. This one's modern, built of brick and insulation, and the false security of drywall. But it stands on the same ground, on the bones of the old Holloway estate. A young couple bought the land cheap. They didn't ask why. At first, everything was normal. The wife, Eliza, grew vegetables in the soil, though the crops came up pale, translucent, as if drained of color. The husband laughed, said it was the clay. But when their daughter was born, small, quiet, eyes already open, the doctor grew pale. He said she looked too familiar. They named her Aris, short, soft, old-sounding. As she grew, the house began to hum. At night, the walls whispered, not in language, but in rhythm, that same circular pulse that had once lived under the fields. The same breath that filled the lungs of a dead bloodline now stirred in the rafters of a new home. Eliza started sleepwalking. Sometimes she'd wake up in the garden, dirt packed under her nails, whispering a name she didn't recognize, Eurasia. When her husband tried to stop her one night, she turned toward him with eyes half closed and said, in a voice not hers, "He's coming home." Within weeks, the house began to sink. Hairline cracks crawled up the walls, and from beneath the floorboards came a steady, hollow thudding, like small fists against wood. Eliza's pregnancy test came back positive, but the doctor swore she hadn't conceived in months. The local priest refused to enter the house after hearing what he called 2 heartbeats in one body. Neighbors claimed they saw a man standing in the upstairs window, tall, barefoot, hands resting on her shoulders, though Eliza's husband was away that week. By the 3rd month, the soil around the foundation began to breathe. At night, fog rose from it in slow, rhythmic bursts. A cradle appeared in the nursery, though neither parent had bought one. Inside it lay a blanket, old, stained, and lined with bones small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. The sheriff's report stopped there, unfinished. Sealed again, same order number as before for 1147. No one lives on that land now, but the county assessor's files list it as active residence. Every year, the system auto-renews the property tax under the same name, Eurasia M. Holloway. And if you drive past that field on certain nights, when the fog is low and the crickets are silent, you'll see a faint red glow through the trees, pulsing like something alive. Some say it's the house remembering itself. Others say it's the bloodline, refusing extinction, because flesh can die. But memory breeds. It seeps through wood and soil and womb alike, and it waits. Always it waits, for the next voice to speak its name aloud.